Welcome to the Deep Dive. We're taking a deep dive today into the world of threat assessment in schools.
Uh-huh.
It's going to be a fascinating topic, whether you're someone who's maybe prepping for a meeting,
Yeah.
curious about school safety, or just a lifelong learner like myself.
Right.
We're going to be uncovering some surprising facts about this really crucial topic and
Yes.
bust a few myths along the way,
Definitely.
and hopefully leave you with some thought-provoking questions.
Looking forward to it.
So to kick things off,
Mhm.
one of the biggest things that I think people maybe misunderstand about threat assessment
Yeah.
is that they think it's all about reacting to a dangerous situation,
Mm-hmm.
but it's actually a lot more proactive than that.
Yeah, it really is.
So could you kind of tell me what you mean by that?
Well, it's really about identifying and addressing potential problems before they actually escalate into violence.
Okay, so it's less about putting out fires and more about preventing them in the first place.
Exactly. It's all about prevention. That's what threat assessment aims to do, is shift that focus.
Right. Gotcha. From reaction to prevention,
Okay.
creating safer learning environments by addressing those warning signs early on.
Uh-huh.
And, this is actually what sets it apart from those zero tolerance policies we often hear about,
Right.
which haven't really proven to be that effective.
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense. So instead of just punishing students after something happens, threat assessment is trying to sort of get ahead of the problem.
Exactly.
But what exactly constitutes a threat in a school setting?
So a threat in this context is really any expression of intent to harm someone.
Okay.
And this could be physical harm, sexual harm, even psychological harm.
Uh-huh.
The key is that it involves a deliberate intention to cause harm to another person.
Okay.
And, these threats can be communicated in so many different ways.
Right.
Spoken, written through gestures, or even online.
So it's not just about someone explicitly saying, like, I'm going to hurt you, right?
Absolutely not. Threats can be so indirect and subtle,
Okay.
or they can be very direct and obvious.
Think about it like this.
Okay.
Imagine a student writes a really dark, violent story for a creative writing assignment.
Uh-huh.
That on its own might not be a cause for alarm, right?
Right.
But what if that same student has a history of disciplinary issues,
Oh,
social isolation,
I see.
maybe has made concerning comments to other students?
Okay.
Now, the context changes that story from simply creative writing
Right.
to a potential warning sign.
Yeah, the context really does make a big difference there.
Huge.
So how do we then distinguish between something that's just a bit off and a real actionable threat?
So that's where the difference between what we call transient and substantive threats comes into play.
Okay.
So a transient threat is simply a momentary expression of anger or frustration,
Right.
like a student lashing out verbally during an argument.
Gotcha.
It's typically impulsive and doesn't involve a real plan or intent to actually follow through.
So it's more like heat of the moment kind of stuff.
Exactly.
Okay.
Now, a substantive threat, that's different. This indicates a genuine intent to harm, often involving planning, preparation, and access to means.
Okay.
So, for instance, let's say a student has repeatedly expressed a desire to harm specific individuals,
Right.
has researched weapons online, and has started stockpiling materials.
Okay.
That combination of factors really suggests a substantive threat that requires immediate attention.
Yeah, that's a very clear example. And I can see the difference now between transient and substantive.
Yeah,
And that is a really important distinction
it is.
because it really guides how schools respond to potential threats.
Right.
Now, one of the things that surprised me when I was learning about this is that it's not just a matter of calling the principal.
Right.
And the police, when we're dealing with these threats, it actually involves a whole team of people.
Absolutely.
So can you kind of tell me about that?
Yeah, that's one of the things that makes threat assessment so effective.
Okay.
It takes this multidisciplinary approach,
Uh-huh.
which means it brings together professionals with diverse expertise. It's not just about security personnel.
Gotcha.
It's about understanding the whole picture.
Okay, so who's on this threat assessment team?
So you have your school administrators
Okay.
who are responsible for the overall safety and policies.
Uh-huh.
But then you also have your school counselors and psychologists
Okay.
who can assess a student's mental and emotional well-being.
Mm-hmm.
And let's not forget the teachers. They have those daily interactions with students.
Right.
They can provide really valuable insights into changes in behavior patterns.
Yeah, so it's a real team effort with all these different people bringing their unique perspective.
Exactly. And to round out the team, you often have school resource officers, or as we call them, SROs.
Okay.
And they bring their law enforcement perspective to the table. And in some cases, you might even have external experts,
Oh, wow.
like mental health professionals or legal advisors involved.
Okay.
Really depends on the situation.
Wow, so it's a really diverse group of people, all working together to assess and manage potential threats.
And that diversity is really critical
Okay.
because it allows the team to consider all angles of the situation.
Mm-hmm.
They can gather information from different sources, analyze patterns, and develop a comprehensive plan
Okay.
to address the needs of that student and the school community.
I can definitely see how having all that range of expertise would be very valuable.
Yeah.
Now, I have to ask this because it's something that always comes up in like movies and TV shows.
Mhm.
Is there some kind of profile of a student who might pose a threat?
Okay.
Like, can you just look at someone and say, like, that person's dangerous?
That's a great question, and it's one that deserves a very clear answer.
Yeah.
The idea that there is a specific profile of a dangerous student
Okay.
is a very dangerous myth.
Okay.
There is absolutely no one-size-fits-all profile that can accurately predict who will become violent.
Gotcha.
Attempting to profile individuals based on superficial characteristics or stereotypes is not only inaccurate, but also very harmful.
I see.
It can lead to biases, discrimination, and missed opportunities to provide support to those who need it most.
So all those movie tropes about like the troubled loner or whatever are totally off base.
Totally.
Mm.
Threat assessment recognizes that human behavior is very complex,
Uh-huh.
influenced by a wide range of factors.
Right.
So focusing on individual characteristics or simplistic labels ignores those nuanced realities of human experience.
Okay.
And it can prevent us from understanding those real warning signs and underlying issues that contribute to that behavior.
So if we can't rely on profiles, then what should we be looking for? Are there warning signs that can help us identify potential threats?
Absolutely. While there's no single profile, most students who pose a substantive threat do signal their intentions in some way.
Okay.
And these signals can be very subtle or very overt,
Mm-hmm.
but they often involve a pattern of concerning behaviors or communications.
So like what kind of signals should we be paying attention to?
Well, it could be things they say to their friends, themes that emerge in their written work or artwork,
Uh-huh.
changes in their behavior, or even posts they make on social media.
Okay.
It's about looking for those patterns and changes that deviate from their typical behavior.
Makes sense.
Right.
Yeah. So let's say that someone, maybe a teacher, a parent, or even another student, observes something concerning what should they do?
Well, the most important thing is to act quickly.
Okay.
If you're concerned about a potential threat, don't hesitate to report it.
Right.
Contact the appropriate school personnel,
Okay.
such as an administrator, a counselor, or the school's threat assessment team leader.
And what if you're not sure if it's a real threat or not? Is it better to just err on the side of caution?
Absolutely. You don't have to be an expert in threat assessment to report your concerns.
Okay.
It's not your job to determine the level of risk.
Right.
That's what those trained professionals are there for.
Right.
By reporting your concerns, you allow them to assess the situation and take the appropriate action.
Okay. That's reassuring to know. So it sounds like threat assessment is this really crucial part of school safety, but it's really just one piece of a much larger puzzle.
Yeah. You hit the nail on the head. Threat assessment shouldn't exist in isolation.
Okay.
It's one component of this holistic approach
Sure.
to creating safer schools.
Okay. I'm intrigued. What else is involved in that holistic approach?
Well, we need to think about both physical and psychological safety.
Okay.
Schools need those physical security measures like you were talking about, but they also need to cultivate an environment where students feel supported, heard, and connected.
Okay.
That means fostering a culture of trust and open communication,
Right.
providing accessible mental health resources, and promoting positive social interactions.
So it's not just about preventing the bad stuff, but also about actively creating a positive and supportive school environment?
Exactly. It's about addressing those root causes of violence and creating a culture where everyone feels safe, respected, and valued.
This has been so insightful, and I'm sure our listeners are eager to learn more.
Yeah.
But we're going to take a quick break, and when we come back, we'll explore how schools are putting these ideas into practice and the incredible impact that they are having. So stay tuned.
Can't wait. Welcome back to our deep dive into threat assessment.
So before the break, we were talking about the importance of a holistic approach to school safety
Right.
and how there's no one-size-fits-all profile of a student who might pose a threat.
Yeah.
And I was thinking about that,
Uh-huh.
all those times you see movies or TV shows,
Right.
and they try and paint a picture of what a dangerous student looks like.
Exactly.
But like you were saying, it's just not that simple, is it?
Not at all. Human behavior is far too complex to be reduced to those simplistic profiles.
Right.
Each individual is unique.
Yeah.
And their actions are shaped by so many factors, from their personal experiences to their social environment.
Sure.
And relying on stereotypes or superficial characteristics can actually blind us to those real warning signs.
So if we can't use profiles,
Yeah.
then how do we go about identifying potential threats?
Right.
What does that process even look like?
Well, that's where the expertise of that threat assessment team comes into play.
Okay.
These are the folks we talked about earlier:
Right.
school administrators, counselors, teachers, SROs, and sometimes those outside experts. And they use a variety of different methods to gather information
All right.
and assess the level of risk a student might pose.
So it's like a detective investigation, but instead of solving a crime, they're trying to prevent one.
That's a great analogy.
Okay.
They're really piecing together information from different sources to get a clearer picture of what's going on.
Right.
They might interview the student in question, talk to their teachers and classmates, review academic and disciplinary records, even look at their social media activity if that's appropriate.
Wow. That sounds incredibly thorough.
Yeah.
I imagine that takes a lot of time and effort.
It does, but the stakes are high.
Right.
And it's crucial to be as comprehensive as possible.
Yeah.
And it's not just about gathering information. It's also about interpreting that information correctly.
Right.
And that's where the team's expertise and training really come in.
Right.
They know what questions to ask, what patterns to look for, and how to distinguish between concerning behavior
Right.
and just your typical adolescent ups and downs.
Right, because teenagers are so unpredictable.
Exactly.
You never really know what you're going to get.
That's why context is so important.
Huh.
A comment that might seem threatening in one situation could be completely harmless in another.
Okay.
For example, a student might make a dark joke
Right.
that, taken out of context, could sound really alarming.
Yeah.
But if you understand the student's personality, their sense of humor, the dynamics of that social group they were with,
Okay.
you might interpret it very differently.
So it's not just about what's being said or done.
Right.
But the circumstances surrounding it.
Precisely.
Okay.
That's why having that trained team who understands adolescent development, mental health, the complexities of those social dynamics is so crucial.
Makes sense.
They can kind of filter out the noise and focus on those signals that truly warrant concern.
So let's say the team has gathered all this information.
Right.
And they've determined that a student does pose a potential risk. What happens next?
That's when the team moves into the intervention phase.
Okay.
And this is really where that multidisciplinary approach shines. They can develop a plan that's tailored to the specific needs of the student in the situation.
So it's not like a one-size-fits-all solution?
Not at all. Every situation is so unique.
Right.
In some cases, the intervention might involve working closely with the student's parents, providing individual or group counseling, connecting the student with mental health resources in the community.
Right.
In other cases, it might involve creating a safety plan.
With the student, their family, and the school.
I imagine it also kind of depends on the severity of the threat, too, right?
Exactly. The goal is to always use the least restrictive intervention necessary to mitigate the risk.
Gotcha.
So the team will carefully consider that level of risk, the student's individual needs, and the resources available to develop the most appropriate and effective response.
So it's not about, like, punishing the student or anything.
Right.
It's about providing support and guidance to help them make better choices.
Remember, the ultimate goal of threat assessment is to prevent violence.
Right.
And to create a safe and supportive learning environment for everyone. And that often involves addressing those underlying issues that might be contributing to the student's concerning behavior.
So it really takes a very proactive and compassionate approach.
It does. It recognizes that students who engage in threatening behavior often need help, not punishment.
And by intervening early and providing the right support, we can help those students get back on track and thrive.
This has been so insightful.
Good.
It sounds like threat assessment is such a valuable tool for schools.
It is.
But I imagine there are challenges too, right?
You're absolutely right. Implementing these programs effectively comes with its fair share of challenges.
Like what are some of the biggest hurdles?
Well, one of the most significant challenges is simply having enough resources.
Okay.
Schools need trained personnel funding for programs and adequate time to dedicate to threat assessment. Unfortunately, many schools are already stretched so thin.
Right.
And finding those resources can be a real struggle.
Yeah, especially with all the other demands that schools are facing these days.
Exactly.
That's tough.
Another challenge is ensuring that everyone in that school community understands the process and their role in it.
Okay.
We need to make sure that teachers, staff, students, parents know what to look for, how to report those concerns, and what to expect from the threat assessment process.
So communication and education are really key.
Absolutely. Everyone needs to be on the same page to make sure that system works effectively.
Right.
And of course, there's also the challenge of balancing safety with student privacy.
Yeah, that's a tough one.
We need to protect students' rights while also ensuring the safety of that whole school community.
Yeah, that's a delicate balancing act.
It is, but it's a balance we must strive for.
Right.
Threat assessment is a powerful tool.
Yeah.
But it's not a magic bullet.
Right.
It requires that commitment from the entire school community, ongoing training and support for the staff, and open communication with parents and students.
You've painted a really clear picture of how this process works.
Good.
Both the benefits and the challenges.
Yeah.
I'm curious, for anyone listening who might be involved in a school setting, teachers, administrators, parents, even students.
Right.
What's like the one thing you would want them to take away from this conversation?
I would say if you see something, say something.
Okay.
Don't hesitate to report any concerning behavior to the appropriate authorities.
Right.
You might feel like you're overreacting, but it's always better to err on the side of caution.
Yeah.
Remember, you don't have to be an expert to report your concerns. That's what that threat assessment team is for.
Right.
Trust your instincts and let those professionals handle the rest.
And for our listeners who aren't directly involved in the school setting, what can they do to support safer schools?
That's a great question. I think one of the most important things is to advocate for policies and funding that support these programs.
Okay.
Get involved in your local school board meetings.
Right.
Contact your representatives and make your voice heard.
Yeah.
You can also support organizations that are working to prevent school violence and promote mental health resources for students.
This has been a truly eye-opening conversation.
Good. I'm glad.
Threat assessment is such a critical topic.
Yep.
And it's clear that there's so much more to it than most people realize.
Definitely.
Well, listeners, we've covered a lot of ground in this deep dive.
We have.
But there's still so much more to explore.
There is.
So when we come back after a short break, we'll be discussing the importance of creating that culture of trust and communication in schools.
Yes.
The role of mental health services in threat assessment.
Right.
And some inspiring stories of how these programs have made a real difference.
Looking forward to it.
So don't go anywhere. Welcome back to the Deep Dive. We've been talking all about threat assessment in schools, and it's been really eye-opening for me. You know, one of the things that we've talked about is how threat assessment is not just about security measures, but it's also about creating a sense of well-being for everyone in the school community.
That's so important. I think it's something that often gets overlooked. True security, it can't just exist in a vacuum.
Right.
It really is deeply intertwined with that sense of well-being. Imagine a school where students feel isolated, unheard, or constantly on edge, even with the best security measures in place.
Right.
That environment is just inherently vulnerable.
Right.
Threat assessment recognizes that we need to address not just that potential for violence, but also the underlying factors that contribute to it.
So you're saying that creating a positive and supportive school environment is just as important as having, security guards and locked doors.
Yeah, think of it like building a house.
Okay.
You need those strong walls and a sturdy roof to keep the elements out right.
Right.
But you also need a warm and inviting interior to make it a home.
That's a great analogy.
So in a school, setting those strong walls and that roof represent those physical security measures, while that warm and inviting interior is the sense of well-being that we create.
Gotcha.
Through supportive relationships, open communication, and those accessible mental health resources.
Okay, so how do we go about creating that warm and inviting interior in a school?
Well, one of the most important steps is fostering that culture of trust and open communication.
Okay.
This means creating a space where students feel comfortable talking to adults about their problems, whether it's bullying, academic stress, family issues, or really anything else that's weighing on their minds.
It can be anything.
Anything.
Yeah.
It's about making sure that there are trusted adults available to listen without judgment and connect those students with the support they need.
I can see how that would make a huge difference for a student who's struggling.
Huge.
To know that there's someone there that they can go to.
Right. And this is where school counselors, psychologists, social workers, and other mental health professionals play such a vital role.
Yeah.
They can provide that individual and group counseling, crisis intervention, and connect those students with resources in the community.
So it's not just about reacting to problems, but also about providing that proactive support to help students build resilience and develop healthy coping mechanisms.
It's about empowering students with the tools and resources they need to navigate those challenges of adolescence and build a strong foundation for their future.
This is all making a lot of sense.
Good.
But do we have any real-world examples of how this holistic approach to threat assessment is actually making a difference?
There are countless inspiring stories out there.
Okay.
One that comes to mind is a school in rural Kentucky that was facing a number of challenges, including high rates of poverty, substance abuse, and family instability.
Wow, that's a lot.
Yeah, and they decided to implement a comprehensive threat assessment program that focused not just on identifying those potential threats, but also on addressing those underlying social and emotional needs of their students.
So what kind of things did they do?
Well, they started by training all of their staff.
Okay.
From teachers and administrators to bus drivers and cafeteria workers.
Wow.
Everyone on how to recognize signs of distress in students and how to respond with empathy and support.
Okay.
They also created a peer mentorship program where older students were trained to support younger students who might be struggling.
Okay, cool.
And they partnered with local mental health agencies to provide on-site counseling services.
Wow, so they really went above and beyond.
They did, and they saw some incredible results.
What were some of the results?
Well, within a few years, they saw a significant decrease in disciplinary referrals, suspensions, and bullying incidents. More importantly, they saw an increase in student engagement, academic performance, and overall well-being.
That's great.
Yeah, students reported feeling safer, more connected to their school, and more hopeful about their future.
That's really incredible.
It sounds like they created a real ripple effect of positive change throughout that entire school community.
That's amazing.
And that's the power of this holistic approach to threat assessment.
Right.
It's not just about preventing violence. It's about creating a culture of care support and belonging that empowers students to thrive.
This has been such an inspiring deep dive.
I'm glad.
I feel like I've learned so much about what threat assessment is and how it can make a real difference in the lives of students and their communities.
And my pleasure to be here.
Well, listeners, I hope you feel as inspired as I do. And remember, we all have a role to play in creating safer and more supportive learning environments for our children.
Absolutely.
If you're interested in learning more about threat assessment or getting involved in your community, there are tons of resources available. You can reach out to your local school district, your state's Department of Education, or national organizations like the National Association of School Psychologists.
There you go.
Thank you so much for joining us on this deep dive into the world of threat assessment.
It was a pleasure being here.
We hope you learned something new and valuable.
Yes.
We'll be back soon with another fascinating topic. But until then, take care.
Bye, everyone.
And stay curious.